Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week we're going to be roughly assembling the cab, just enough to make the truck, well, look like a truck. So we can work out where all the electronics are going to go and work out where the wiring is going to run. Right, we're on to bag F, which contains the bits to make up the cab and mount it to the chassis. Step 52, the side cheeks. Now, a lot of the bits in this step glue on, so we're going to skip those, but we can fit the cheeks themselves. We need 4 M2x5 cap heads, 4 2mm washers, and the cheeks K5 and 6. It's a bit unusual having them separate. I guess it's to make the cab easier to mould. Either way, they're attached with the 4 screws and washers, and of course they fit rather nicely. You'd never know they were separate pieces. Step 53, the side mirrors, which we don't need to get a feel for where things are going to go in the cab, so we're going to skip them. Step 54 involves the mirrors and the side windows. Again, we're going to skip them this time. The rearmost windows get stuck on too, so that's a no-go until we paint things. Plus, for the time being, it's quite handy to have access to the inside of the cab to fiddle with the test setups. Step 55, cab aero. Now this one we can mostly do, just skipping the chrome trim around the rear window. Okay, we need 4 M2x6s, 4 M2x4s, 4 M2 nuts and 4 L-shaped stays. For the plastic there's 2 large aero bits, K1 and K4. First the stays mount to the aero with the short screws. Now the holes are oversized so you can adjust the position before tightening the screws. Also make a note that the stays have a right way round. The end with the 2 dots goes on the cab end, so we need to use the plain end on the aero. Also keep in mind we're threading some very short M2 screws into plastic, so there's not much wiggle room for over tightening. On the cab end we use the long screws and the nuts. Install them all so they're a little bit loose, then position the aero and tighten up all the screws. The aero has a hook shape in the bottom that should fit evenly around the cab, making it easy to get the position just right. Step 56, the windscreen, which we'll skip so we can get into the cab while it's attached to the chassis. Step 57, the front of the roof. Now I'm not going to fit the light buckets just yet, so all we need are the 2 M3x12 grub screws and M2 the front of the roof. Also we need 2 3x8 self-tappers, 2 3mm washers and 2 W13 brackets. But I usually glue the front of the roof to the main roof, so I was going to skip them. But I changed my mind for the dry build, so we'll come to them in just a minute. The 2 grub screws thread into the holes near the front of the roof. We want to thread them in so there's still 7mm of thread poking out. You don't need to be all that accurate, just make sure you don't go too far and end up with the grub screws sticking out the front. Here are the screws and the washers and the W12 brackets. They mount to the lower holes on the roof with a screw and washer each. You can thread the screw in a couple of turns, then slot the bracket in, which makes it quite a bit easier. Otherwise there's a bit too much to hold together while you tighten the screws up. Once they're nipped up, the roof section is ready to fit. Step 59, fitting the front of the roof to the main bit of the roof. We need 2 flanged M3 nuts, 4 W5 spacers and M1 the roof. All we need to do is offer the front up to the main roof so the 2 grub screws pass through 2 slots. Then we thread on the nuts, spinning them up by hand as far as they'll go, then we nip them up the rest of the way with a spanner. The W5 spacers get pushed onto the 4 posts in the roof, but do take care, if you knock them they do have a tendency to fall off and roll away. Okay, step 60, which involves fitting the roof aero. Now we need more or less the same set of bits as the cab aero. 4 M2x6s, 4 M2x4s, 4 M2 nuts and 4 stays. And then you've got K2 and 3, the aero parts. And since they fit in exactly the same way, we're just going to cut to them being fitted. There we go, very nice. Step 61, the roof spoiler. We need 4 2x8 self-tappers, 2 2mm washers and M3 the spoiler. There's also a couple of bits that would get glued on, but of course we're going to be skipping them. The spoiler offers up to the roof and has 4 posts that slot into some holes. pop the posts in, then the two rear holes get just the screws as they are, but the front two holes also use the washers, which is a bit strange, but there we go. Nip them up, and that's the spoiler fitted. Step 62 is the visor, which we don't need for a quick assembly, so we'll skip it. Step 63 is fitting the roof. We need 4 3x30 self-tappers, the roof and the cab. All we do is pop the roof onto the cab, making sure the spacers are all properly fitted. Flip it over and install the 4 screws. When we do the final build of the cab, we're going to replace these with a magnetic mount. I like to install some of the electronics up in the roof so they're out of the way, and it's really handy to be able to just pop the roof off for access. Step 64 has us install a scuttle panel and wipers, but it's all glued, so we're going to skip it. Step 65 is the dashboard. Again, lots of paint and glue, and we won't need it to work on the electronics, so we'll skip that too. Step 66, fitting the dashboard and the rear cab mount. Obviously, we're not going to fit the dash, but we do need the cab mount. So we need 4 3x8 self-tappers and G3 the mount. Now the mount offers up inside the rear of the cab and lines up with the 4 holes. Now it does have a right way up, so pay attention to the diagram. Having said that, Tamiya have been quite clever, so it won't fit very well if you've got it upside down. Install and nip up the 4 screws and the mount is mounted. Step 67, the upper grille. We need 4 M2x4s, 2 2x6 self-tappers, R1 the top panel with the Scania logo, R10 the main bit, and R8 and 9 the side bits. And there's some insert strips, but they get glued on. Right, the side bits slot into the sides of the main bit and get attached with 2 of the short screws each. Quite simple. The grille does seem to be made up from quite a lot of parts. No doubt partly so Tamiya could get a lot of detail in, but it'll also make doing a colour-coded grille far easier to do. You can paint up the bits before assembly, making for perfect edges between the parts. The top bit now, where we just offer it up and use the 2 long screws. And we're left with a rather nice looking assembly. When the strips go on too, it's going to be quite impressive. Step 68, fitting the grille. There's a couple of bits we're going to skip on this one. There's the grab handle that gets glued on, along with some chrome strips, plus a pair of lights that don't actually light up, but we can fit the grille to the cab. So we need 2 M3x12 grub screws and 2 M3 flange nuts. Now, much like the roof, we need to thread in the grubs to the back of the grille, so there's 7mm of thread sticking out. As before, it's not too critical to be accurate, just make sure you don't wind the grub screw all the way through and out the front. Then we offer the grille up to the cab and spin on the 2 nuts and nip them up with a cross wrench. Okay, step 69, the seats and the front cab mount. And of course the seats get glued on, so we're going to skip them. But we can fit the front cab mount. We need 4 M3x10 countersunk screws, 2 3x8 self-tappers, 2 M3 nylock nuts, W9 and 10 the plastic mounts, the chassis and the metal plate. Now the plastic parts are set up to capture the nuts in the top hex holes, the ones with a flat tab towards the top. Pop the nut in and offer it up to the plate, then install the 2 countersunk screws. The other mount is exactly the same, but it does raise the question, why aren't the lower nuts we're going to be installing in the next step captured too? Fitting the cab with the top nuts is going to be nice and straightforward. The bottom nuts though, we'll have to reach under the bumper while trying to line it up and install the screws. It would have been great if there was a bit of plastic to hold them in place. Maybe a job for the 3D printer. The plate now offers up to the front of the chassis and we install the 2 self-tappers. Nip them up and it's ready for the cab. Step 70, fitting the cab. We need 2 M3x10 cap heads, 2 3mm washers, and they also call for a M3x4 grub, but that's for fitting the antenna tube that we don't really need, so we'll just skip it. To fit the cab, we need to insert the tongue on the chassis into the mount on the back of the cab with the cab tilted backwards. Then we tilt the cab forwards until it's sat on the front mount. Now it should be lined up fairly close with a little bit of wiggling needed to get the hole spot on. We just need a screw and a washer in each. It's also rather nice Tamiya include cap heads. It's much easier to get the screws lined up with a square ended Allen key. The screw is held straight and it won't fall off the end. Nip them up, and that's the cab fitted. Step 71, the headlights, which involve lots of paint and glue, so we're going to skip them for now. Step 72, the front bumper lenses, underbar and light buckets, all of which we're going to skip. Which brings us to step 73, the lower grille. So we need two M2x4s, R7 the lower grille and R2 the side parts. And after paint there's also the R4 strip, but that of course gets glued on. The side parts drop into the front of the grille, then from the back we install the two screws. Nice and simple. Then when we get to fit the R4 strip, there's a couple of recesses on the back to mark out where we need to file a pair of slots for the light bar wiring. So we'll need to try and remember to do that before we actually paint things. Step 74, the light bar, which we're going to skip for now, as like the roof bar, there's a bit of custom work to do. Step 75, fitting the lower grille. This step also includes the LED mounts for the headlights, but since we don't have the buckets installed, we're not going to be fitting them just yet. Right, for the grille though, we need two 2x8 self-tappers, and to fit, all we do is drop the grille into the front bumper, which by the way is a rather good fit. And then from the back we just thread in the two screws, nip them up, and we're done. Another quick note though, Tamiya have provided a nice big slot for the light bar wiring in the bumper. A very simple thing, but one less thing to mark up and drill when we're finding places to run the wires. Very nice. Step 76, fitting the bumper. Also, Tamiya has us fitting various antennas with glue, number plates around and some other chrome stickers, none of which we want to do before the paint, so they're going to get skipped just for now. We can fit the bumper though, so we need two M3x18 cap heads and two M3 nylon nuts. Now the idea is we're supposed to install the nuts into the hex holes in the mounts by squeezing them with some pliers, but I found they just slid straight in. I suppose they're supposed to be a friction fit so they don't fall out. I found though when installing the bumper with the screws push the nuts straight out the back, which is more than a little bit annoying. You can rest the truck on its side so you can access the back of the mounts, which does work, but it won't really be practical once it's painted and we've got the mirrors on. We'll definitely need some sort of widgets to capture the nuts and stop them pressing out, or maybe it's just as simple as using a couple of drops of glue. And well, that would be the end of this week's video, but I just couldn't leave it with those huge gaps around the wheel arches. We don't really need them to work out the wiring, but it does look a bit daft without them. Right, so I flip the truck over and remove the inner arches, which is just about doable. Getting a screwdriver past the steering is a bit of a fiddle, but certainly not impossible. Then I added a couple of bits of double-sided tape, which should peel off easily enough, but attached the arches well enough for the time being. Then with the backing peeled off, we just press the outer arches into place, and then we reinstall them on the chassis. With that done, it's looking like a reasonable truck. There's obviously loads more to do, but the point of this part of the build is to get the major parts in place so we can design a magnetic roof mount, work out where the electronics and speaker and the wiring go. Once all that's done, we can strip it back down and paint the parts, which is when we'll rejoin the build. So for this week, that's it. So as always, thanks for watching. Like if you like, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys.